I thought I was building a life with her. Turns out I was just funding one. They had it all planned. Her mother, her brother, even the nephew I thought loved me. And I was just the old fool who signed the checks. Her head rested on my shoulder, warm and light, like it belonged there. The sun was bleeding into the ocean off Batangas, turning everything gold and orange, and Reyna whispered something I'll never forget. "You make me feel safe, Graham, like I finally have a future." I pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her body against mine. My heart was pounding like I was 20 again, not 72. The sand was still warm beneath us, and the sound of waves mixed with distant laughter from other couples down the beach. This moment felt perfect. Too perfect, maybe, but I didn't want to think about that. "I want to buy us a house," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "Something with a view, maybe near here. Somewhere we can watch sunsets like this every night." She lifted her head and looked at me with those dark eyes, wide and grateful, catching the last light of day. "You mean that?" she asked, her voice soft, almost disbelieving. "Of course I do," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I want to build a life with you, Reyna. A real life. Together." She kissed my cheek, soft and slow, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Hope. Real hope. The kind that makes your chest tight and your eyes sting. Margaret had been gone that long. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Not that I was counting anymore. Every day without her had been gray and silent. The house in Vancouver felt like a tomb. I'd wake up reaching for her and find only cold sheets, only emptiness. The coffee maker still had her mug beside it. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to move them. My daughter Sarah called once a month maybe, usually just to check if I was still alive. My son James even less. They had their own lives, their own families, their own problems. I understood, but understanding didn't make the silence any easier. I was alone, fading, invisible. Then I found Reyna on a dating app 6 months ago. I almost didn't download it. What would a 28-year-old woman want with a man like me? Gray hair, liver spots, a bad knee that clicked when I walked. But my neighbor Bob had met someone online. He seemed happy, so I tried. I swiped past dozens of profiles, feeling more pathetic with each one. Then I saw Reyna. Beautiful, yes, but that wasn't what stopped me. It was her smile, genuine, warm, and her profile said she was looking for someone kind, someone honest, someone who valued conversation over superficial things. I almost didn't message her. My finger hovered over her profile for 10 minutes. What would I even say? But I did. Something simple. Something about how her smile seemed kind. She replied within an hour. We talked every night after that. Hours on video, calls. She told me about her life in Manila working at a call center, taking calls from angry Americans about their internet bills. She said it was exhausting, but it paid better than most jobs. She was sending money home to her mother in the province. Her father had died when she was 12. She'd been taking care of her family ever since. She asked about my life too. Really asked. What was it like being an engineer? What was Vancouver like in winter? What did I miss most about my wife? No one had asked me that. No one wanted to hear about Margaret. But Reyna did. She listened. She said I was kind, that I had a gentle soul, that talking to me was the best part of her day. No one had said things like that to me in years. I flew to the Philippines 2 months later, spent 30 hours on planes and in airports, my back screaming, my knee swollen. But when I finally saw her at that cafe in Makati, standing there in a yellow sundress, smiling nervously, it all felt worth it. She was more beautiful in person, delicate and graceful, with a laugh that made my chest feel light. When she hugged me, I felt something crack open inside, something I thought had died with Margaret. We spent every day together after that. She showed me her city, The chaos of Manila traffic, the street food vendors, the massive malls that went on forever. She held my hand in public. I couldn't believe it. This beautiful young woman holding hands with an old man like me. She introduced me to her friends at a restaurant one night. "This is Graham," she said proudly, squeezing my hand. "My boyfriend." My boyfriend. At 72. I felt like a teenager again, awkward and excited and terrified of screwing it up. We took weekend trips, Tagaytay, Baguio, and then this beach in Batangas, just the two of us, watching the sunset. That night, after the sun disappeared and the sky turned purple, we walked back to our hotel. Reyna was quiet. I could tell something was on her mind. "What is it?" I asked. She pulled out her phone and showed me a message. It was in Tagalog, but she translated. "It's from my mother," she said, her voice small. "She's sick, Graham. Diabetes. It's gotten worse. She needs to go to the hospital, but she doesn't have insurance. I'm so sorry to ask, but I don't have enough this month. I've been sending everything I can, but it's not enough." Her voice cracked. I saw tears forming in her eyes, catching the street light. "How much does she need?" I asked. 8,000, she whispered. Dollars. For the hospital bills and medication. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious. "I'm so sorry. I know we just started and I don't want you to think I'm using you." She was crying now, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I pulled her close. Hey, I said. "Don't apologize. Family takes care of each other, right?" She looked up at me, her eyes red. "You mean that?" "Of course," I said. "Let me help." I pulled up my banking app right there on the street and transferred $8,000. My hands were shaking a little. That was a lot of money. But she needed it. Her mother needed it. And what was money compared to this? Compared to her? She watched the transfer go through and then threw her arms around my neck, sobbing into my shoulder. "Thank you," she said over and over. "Thank you so much. I'll pay you back, I promise, as soon as I can." "Don't worry about it," I said, holding her tight. "Seriously, we're together now. What's mine is yours." She kissed me then, really kissed me. And I thought, this is it. This is what I've been missing. This is what love feels like. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. 3 weeks later, Reyna brought me to her hometown, a small village called San Rafael, about 2 hours south of Manila. The roads got worse as we drove, paved highway giving way to cracked concrete and finally dirt. Shanty houses lined the streets. Chickens wandered freely. Dogs slept in the shade of rusted cars. I felt very foreign in my polo shirt and clean sneakers, very old, very white. Kids stared as we passed. Some waved. Reyna waved back, calling out names. When we pulled up to her family's house, a modest concrete structure with a corrugated tin roof and a small yard, I felt a knot in my stomach. What if they didn't like me? What if they thought I was too old for her, too different? But before I could spiral, her mother lords came running out, arms wide. "Graham," she shouted, "welcome, welcome. You are family now." She hugged me hard, and I smelled cooking oil, jasmine soap, and something sweet I couldn't place. Her smile was enormous, her eyes crinkling at the corners. She reminded me of my own mother, actually, that same warmth. "Thank you for having me," I managed to say. "Having you?" She laughed, pulling back to look at me. "You are not a guest. You are family. Come inside." Reyna squeezed my hand and whispered, "See? They love you already." The inside of the house was small but immaculate. Concrete floors swept clean, simple wooden furniture, religious icons on every wall. A small TV played a noontime variety show, and the kitchen table was covered with food: adobo, pancit, lumpia, fried fish, rice piled on banana leaves. It was a feast. Sit," Lords commanded, gesturing to the head of the table. "You are our guest of honor." I sat, completely overwhelmed. I'd never had this. Margaret and I tried for years to have kids, but it never happened. We made peace with it. It was always just the two of us. Quiet dinners, quiet lives. And now here I was, surrounded by noise and laughter, and people who seemed genuinely happy I existed. Reyna sat beside me, beaming. Lords kept piling food on my plate. Eat, eat. You are too skinny. I wasn't skinny, but I ate. Then Reyna's brother walked in. Carlo, mid-20s, tall and lean, with slicked back hair and a confident swagger. He wore a basketball jersey and expensive-looking sneakers. "Graham, brother," he said, reaching out to shake my hand. His grip was firm. Too firm. "Reyna talks about you all the time, man. Says you're a really good guy." "Thanks," I said. "It's good to meet you." He sat down across from me and immediately launched into a story about his delivery business. "I'm just getting started, but I've got big plans. Motorcycles, apps, the whole thing. It's the future here in the Philippines. Just need a little capital to get the bikes and the permits. But once it's rolling, it'll be huge." I nodded politely, unsure what to say. Lords jumped in. "Carlo is very smart, very hardworking, just needs a chance." "I'm sure," I said. Then a little boy came running into the room. He couldn't have been more than 8. He looked at me with curious eyes for a moment, then broke into a huge smile and climbed straight into my lap. "Lolo," he shouted. "Grandfather." My throat tightened. I looked at Reyna. "This is Miko," she said, laughing. "My nephew, Carlo's son. He's been so excited to meet you." Miko wrapped his small arms around my neck and hugged me tight. I felt tears prick my eyes. I'd never been called that before. Never thought I would be. "Hey there, buddy," I said, my voice rough. "What's your name?" "Miko," he said proudly. "Are you really Tita Reyna's boyfriend?" "I am," I said. "Is that okay with you?" He nodded enthusiastically. "You're nice. Will you play with me later?" "Of course," I said, and I meant it. Lords watched from across the table, her hands folded, her smile soft. "Graham, you are a blessing," she said. "You take such good care of our Reyna. We are so grateful, so very grateful." I waved it off, embarrassed. "She takes care of me too," I said. "More than you know." Lords leaned forward. "Have you thought about buying property here?" she asked. "In the Philippines?" I blinked. "I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it." "It's so cheap here compared to Canada," she said, "and Reyna could take care of it for you. Make sure everything is good. You could visit any time, have a home here, with us." Reyna leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. "That would be nice," she said softly. "Wouldn't it?" I looked around the table, Carlo nodding eagerly, Lord smiling, Miko playing with my watch, Reyna's hand in mine. This is what I wanted. A family, a place to belong. "Maybe," I said, "let me think about it." But in my head I'd already decided. This felt right. This felt like home. Later that night, Reyna and I lay in the small guest room they'd prepared for us. The bed was hard, the fan rattled, but I didn't care. I was happy. "Thank you for bringing me here," I whispered. "Thank you for coming," she whispered back. "My family loves you. I can tell." I smiled in the dark. Then I heard voices outside, low and fast, Tagalog. I couldn't understand the words, but I recognized the voices. Carlo and Reyna. The tone felt urgent, sharp, not angry, but intense. I wanted to get up and check, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. When Reyna came back inside a few minutes later, I asked, "Everything okay?" She climbed back into bed. "Yes," she said quickly. "Just family stuff. Carlo needed advice about something. Nothing important." "You sure?" I asked. "Yes, baby," she said, kissing my forehead. "Go to sleep." I closed my eyes, but something felt off. I couldn't place it. I should have listened to that feeling. It started small. Little things I told myself didn't matter. We'd been back in Manila for 2 weeks when I first noticed Reyna's phone habits. It was always face down on the table, always. When it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly, then flip it back over without reading it. "Who's that?" I asked one morning over breakfast. She was eating rice and eggs, barely looking up. "Just work," she said flatly. "They always message at weird times." "Do you need to check it?" I asked. Her jaw tightened. "No, I'm with you." I let it go, but it kept happening. At dinner, during movies, in bed at night. Buzz, flip, ignore. Then she started getting irritated when I asked about her day. It used to be our thing. I'd ask how work was, and she'd tell me stories about difficult customers or funny conversations. But now, when I asked, she'd snap. "Why do you always ask me that, Graham?" she said one night. "I don't know," I said. "I'm just interested. I want to know about your life." "Well, it's the same every day," she said, "boring. Can we just relax?" I backed off. I didn't want to be that guy. The jealous old man who questioned everything. I wanted to be understanding, supportive. But the distance was growing. Then Carlos started showing up. The first time, it was a Saturday morning. I was making coffee when someone knocked on the door. I opened it, and there he was. "Hey, brother," he said, walking in like he lived there. "Is Reyna here?" "She's in the shower," I said. "Want some coffee?" "Sure, sure," he said, sitting down at the kitchen table. We made small talk, the weather, traffic, his delivery business. Then he said, "Hey, Graham, can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said. "I need a small loan," he said. "Emergency. My bike broke down and I need it for deliveries. Can't work without it. Just 15,000 pesos. Maybe $300? I'll pay you back next week when I get paid." I hesitated. $300 wasn't a huge amount, but it felt sudden, transactional. "Let me talk to Reyna," I said. When Reyna came out, I mentioned it. She didn't even blink. "It's okay, baby," she said. "Family helps family. That's just how it is here." So I gave him the money. He thanked me, hugged me, promised he'd pay it back. He didn't. 2 weeks later, he was back. "Graham, brother, I need another small favor. My landlord is threatening to kick me out. I'm short 20,000 pesos, just until next month." I looked at Reyna. She nodded. I gave him the money. Then it was 30,000, then another 15. Always an emergency. Always next week. I kept a mental tally, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to seem cheap or uncaring. This is what family does, I told myself. They help each other. But I was starting to feel more like an ATM than a family member. One evening, my old friend Dennis showed up. We'd worked together in the 90s on a construction project in Hong Kong, and he'd retired to Manila 5 years ago. I'd reached out when I first arrived, and we'd had dinner a few times. He called and asked if he could stop by. "Sure," I said. "Come over. I'll introduce you to Reyna." When he arrived, Reyna was polite but distant. She shook his hand, offered him a drink, then excused herself to make a phone call. Dennis waited until she was out of earshot. "Be careful, mate," he said quietly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've seen this before," he said. "Young local girl, older foreign guy, family always needing money. It's a pattern." I felt my face go hot. "She's not like that," I said. "You don't know her." "Maybe I don't," Dennis said, holding up his hands. "But I know this place, and I know how these things go. Just keep your eyes open, yeah?" "I appreciate the concern," I said, my voice tight, "but we're fine." Dennis left 20 minutes later. I was angry. Who was he to judge? He didn't know Reyna. He didn't know us. But his words stuck with me. That night, after Reyna fell asleep, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I opened my banking app and scrolled through the transfers. 8,000 for Lourdes' hospital bills, 300 to Carlo, 600 more, 800. Reyna's rent, her phone bill, groceries, medicine for Lourdes, gifts for Miko, school supplies. I added it up in my head. $32,000 in 6 months. My stomach turned. That was more than I'd spent on myself in 2 years. But then I looked at Reyna. She was sleeping peacefully, her face soft in the moonlight, her hair spread across the pillow. She looked so innocent, so beautiful. She loves you, I told myself. This is what love costs. People need help sometimes. You have the money. Why not use it for something good? She said she loved me every night. I love you, Graham, she'd whisper, her arms around me. And I'd believe her, because I wanted to, because I needed to. 2 months later, everything changed. We were driving along the coast one afternoon, just exploring, when we passed a small subdivision. New houses, clean streets, a sign that said Ocean View Homes. Let's look, Reyna said. We pulled in and walked around. The houses were beautiful, modern, 2 stories with balconies and big windows. The last lot on the street had a perfect view of the water. This one, Reyna said, stopping in front of it. This is the one. The house was white stucco with a red tile roof. The balcony overlooked the ocean. I could picture us there. Morning coffee, sunset dinners, a life together. The real estate agent met us at the site. A woman in her 50s, professional and friendly. She showed us the floor plan. Bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a garage. It's perfect, Reyna said, gripping my arm. Isn't it perfect? It's beautiful, I admitted. How much? I asked the agent. $85,000, she said, US dollars. I did the math in my head. About 115,000 Canadian. That was most of my savings. Margaret's life insurance, everything we'd built together. But I looked at Reyna. Her eyes were shining. She looked so happy, so hopeful. We'll think about it, I said. That night she couldn't stop talking about it. We could have a real home, Graham, not this rental, a place that's ours. We could have a garden. Miko could visit. We could grow old there together. Grow old together. The words hit me right in the chest. I want that, I said, but there's something I need to ask. If we buy it, can it be in both our names? Her face changed, just slightly. Foreigners can't own land here, she said. It's the law. It would have to be in my name. Just your name? I asked. Technically, she said, but it's still ours, baby. I mean, we're together. What's mine is yours, right? And I can add your name later. We just need to do the paperwork first. I wanted to believe her, but something felt wrong. Are you sure? I asked. She took my hands. Do you trust me? She asked, looking directly into my eyes. I did. I wanted to. I needed to. Okay, I said. Let's do it. The next day, I wired $85,000. The house was ours. Except it wasn't. The first week was fine. We drove out to see the house, measured for furniture, talked about paint colors. Reyna was excited. I was excited. Then she said her mother needed a place to stay. Just for a little while, Reyna said. They're repairing her house in San Rafael. Can she stay at ours? Just until it's done? Of course, I said. That's fine. Lourdes moved in. She brought 2 suitcases and a smile. Thank you, Graham, she said. You are so kind. A week later, Carlos showed up with his things. What's going on? I asked Reyna. He got kicked out of his apartment, she said. Can he stay in the guest room? Just temporarily? I didn't want to say no. I didn't want to be the guy who turned away family. Fine, I said, temporarily. But weeks passed, then a month. I asked Reyna when we'd move in. Soon, she said. I just need to fix a few things first. Painting, furniture. Give me a little more time. I was still living in my rented apartment, alone, paying $1,500 a month, while my $85,000 house sat full of her family. One afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove out to the house without telling anyone. I just needed to see it, needed to understand what was happening. When I pulled up, Carlo's motorcycle was in the driveway, a new one, shiny black with chrome accents. Must have cost at least $2,000. Lourdes was hanging laundry in the yard. She saw me and waved. but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "Graham," she called. "What are you doing here?" "I came to check on the house," I said, walking toward her. "Is Reyna here?" "No," she said, "she's working." "Can I come inside?" I asked. She hesitated just for a second. Then she stepped aside. The inside looked completely different. There was a new couch, a flat-screen TV, a glass dining table with matching chairs. None of it had been there before. "Where did all this come from?" I asked. "Reyna bought it," Lourdes said simply. "With my money," I thought, but didn't say. I walked upstairs. Carlo's room had a PlayStation, a laptop, designer sneakers piled in the corner. Miko's room was full of toys, action figures, Legos, a bike. I stood in the hallway and looked around. My house, my money, but none of it was mine. When I came back downstairs, Lourdes was making lunch. "Would you like to stay and eat?" she asked. "No," I said, "I need to go." I drove back to Manila in silence. My hands were shaking on the wheel. When I got back to the apartment, Father Benedict was sitting on the steps outside. I'd met him at a local parish. Nice man, kind, in his 60s with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. "Graham," he said, standing up, "I was hoping to talk to you." "Now's not a great time," I said. "I understand," he said, "but may I speak frankly?" I nodded. He chose his words carefully. "My son, I've been a priest for 30 years. I've seen many things, many situations, and sometimes love blinds us to the truth." I stared at him. "What truth?" I asked. "That people see what they want to see in us," he said gently. "And sometimes what they see is not love, it's opportunity." "You don't know her," I said. "You don't know us." "Perhaps not," he said, "but I know pain when I see it, and I see it in you." He put a hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, my son. Protect your heart." Then he left. I sat on those steps for an hour. Just sat, thinking, wondering, doubting. I found her other Facebook account by accident. Complete accident. I was looking for a photo she'd posted of us at the beach. She'd tagged me in it, and I wanted to save it to my phone. So I searched her name, Reyna Santos. Her profile came up, but then below it, I saw another result, Reyna Villanueva. Same profile picture, same face, different name. I frowned and clicked it. My hands started shaking. Her relationship status said single. There were photos I'd never seen. Reyna at a beach resort with friends. Reyna in a club, dressed in a tight dress I didn't recognize. Reyna with a man, young, Filipino, good-looking, his arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. The caption said, "Miss my baby." The comments were in Tagalog. I copied them into Google Translate. "When are you coming back to Cebu? Can't wait to see you again, love. Miss you so much, babe." I felt like I was falling, like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I checked the dates 3 weeks ago, when she told me she was visiting her aunt in Baguio. I called her immediately. She answered on the third ring. "Hey, baby," she said. Her voice was light, happy. "Come home," I said. "What?" she asked. "Come home right now," I said. "We need to talk." "What's wrong?" she asked. "Just come home, Reyna." 45 minutes later, she walked through the door. I was sitting on the couch, my laptop open in front of me. "What's going on?" she asked, setting down her purse. I turned the laptop toward her. She looked at the screen and froze. "Who is he?" I asked. My voice was shaking. "Who is who?" she said, but her face had gone pale. "Don't lie to me," I said. "The guy in the photos, who is he?" She grabbed the laptop and stared at it. Then she looked at me with wide eyes. "He's just a friend, Graham. Just a friend." "A friend," I repeated. "He calls you baby. He says he misses you." "That's just how Filipinos talk," she said. "You don't understand the culture." "Then explain it to me," I said. "Explain why your relationship status says single. Explain why you told me you were in Baguio when you were actually in Cebu." She didn't answer. Her mouth opened and closed. "Reyna," I said, my voice breaking, "tell me the truth, please." "The truth?" she shouted suddenly. "You want the truth? Fine. Yes, I went to Cebu. Yes, I have friends. Yes, I have a life outside of you. Is that what you want to hear?" "And the money?" I asked quietly. "What about the money? The house? The loans to Carlo? Your mother's medical bills?" She laughed. It was harsh and bitter and nothing like her usual laugh. "What about it?" she said. "You think I'm with you for love?" she asked. "Look at yourself, Graham. You're 72 years old. You're boring. You can barely walk upstairs. I gave you everything. And this is how you treat me? Like I'm some criminal?" The words hit me like a punch. "Get out," I said. "What?" she said. "Get out of my apartment," I said. "Right now." Her face twisted. For a moment, I thought she might cry, might apologize, might say it was all a misunderstanding. Instead, she grabbed her purse. "Fine," she said. "I'm done with this anyway." She walked to the door, then turned back. "You know what, Graham? You were easy. So desperate for attention that you believed everything I said, every lie, every promise. That's on you." Then she left. The door slammed. I sat there in the silence, the laptop still open, her face smiling up at me from the photos. With him. I didn't cry. I just sat there, numb. She didn't come home that night, or the next, or the one after that. I hired attorney Rosales 3 days after Reyna left. Dennis gave me his number. "He's good," Dennis said, "honest. He'll tell you the truth even if you don't want to hear it." I met him at his office in Makati, a small place on the third floor of an old building. He was in his 50s, balding, with tired eyes and a firm handshake. "Mr. Graham," he said, "please sit down." I sat, told him everything: the money, the house, the loans, Reyna's other account, the guy in Cebu. He took notes, his pen scratching across a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he looked at me over his glasses. "How much did you spend in total?" he asked. I'd done the math already. 140,000, I said, Canadian dollars. He didn't flinch, didn't seem surprised. "And the house is registered solely in her name?" "Yes," I said, "but she said she'd add mine later, that it was just paperwork." He sighed and set down his pen. "Mr. Graham, I need you to understand something. Under Philippine law, if the property title is in her name, it's her property. Legally, you have no claim to it." "None?" I asked. "None," he said. "You could try to prove it was intended as a loan or an investment, but without a written contract, without any documentation, it's nearly impossible." I felt sick. "What about the money I gave her brother?" I asked. "Same issue," he said. "Without a contract. Those are considered gifts, not loans. You can't compel repayment." "So I have nothing," I said. "I'll investigate," he said. "I'll look into the property records, see if there's anything we can do. But I want you to be prepared for the reality that you may not recover anything." I put my head in my hands. 2 days later, Attorney Rosales called. "I have the report," he said. "Can you come to my office?" I went immediately. He handed me a folder. Inside were property records, transaction histories, and photographs. "The house is solely in Miss Santos's name," he said. "There's no indication anywhere that you're a co-owner or even a tenant. Additionally, I looked into your transfers to her brother. He used approximately $12,000 to purchase a motorcycle and open a small convenience store. There's no paperwork suggesting these were loans." "And my money for Lourdes' medical bills?" I asked. He flipped through his notes. "I spoke to a contact at the hospital. Lourdes was treated there, yes, but the bills totaled approximately $3,000, not $8. My stomach dropped. "What?" "I'm sorry," he said. "It appears the rest went elsewhere." I couldn't speak. He continued. "I also spoke with some neighbors near the property. Several told me that Lourdes has been referring to you as her Sponsor. Sponsor? I said. It's a term used here, he explained carefully, for foreigners who provide financial support to locals, usually without romantic commitment, more transactional. I felt like I might be sick. I'm sorry, Attorney Rosales said. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear. I stood up, shook his hand, paid his fee. Then I drove to the house. I don't know why. I just needed to see it one more time. When I pulled up, Lourdes was sweeping the front steps. She saw me and stopped. Her face went cold, formal. Graham, she said, what are you doing here? Is Reyna here? I asked. No, she said, she doesn't want to see you. I just want to talk to her, I said. She's not here, Lourdes repeated. You should go. I looked past her into the yard. Miko was playing with a remote control car, brand new, expensive. He saw me and waved. Lolo, he called. But Lourdes said something sharp in Tagalog, and he looked down and went back to playing. He called me Lolo, I said quietly. He was just a child, Lourdes said. He didn't understand. I stared at her. This woman who'd hugged me like a son, who'd cooked for me, who'd called me family. Did you ever even like me? I asked. She didn't answer, just looked at me with empty eyes. I got back in my car and drove away. I never went back. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing from Reyna. I didn't call, didn't text. I was trying to accept it, trying to move on, but I couldn't. I needed closure. I needed to hear it from her. So I sent one message. I just want to talk, please. She didn't reply for 2 days. Then, fine, tomorrow 3 p.m., coffee near SM Mall. I got there at 2:30, ordered nothing, just sat at a table by the window and waited. She arrived at 4:15, over an hour late. She looked perfect, makeup flawless, hair styled, wearing a new dress I'd never seen, probably bought with my money. She sat down without looking at me. What do you want, Graham? She asked. Her voice was flat, bored. I want to understand, I said. I want to know if any of it was real. She sighed and finally looked at me. Her eyes were cold, empty. What do you want me to say? She asked. The truth, I said. Did you ever love me? She paused, looked out the window, then back at me. Graham, you're a nice man, she said. But you knew what this was? No, I said. I didn't. Yes, you did, she said. You wanted to feel young again, wanted to feel desired. I needed security, money, stability. We both got something out of it. I gave you everything, I said, my voice shaking. And I gave you companionship, she said. I smiled when you wanted me to smile. I listened when you needed someone to listen. I made you feel special when no one else did. That's worth something, isn't it? I couldn't speak. She leaned back in her chair. The house is mine, she said. The money's spent. There's nothing left to talk about. Move on. That's it? I asked. That's it, she said. She stood up. I reached out and grabbed her hand. Wait, I said, please. She pulled her hand away. What, Graham? Did you ever even like me? I asked. Even a little bit? She looked down at me, really looked at me, and I saw the truth in her eyes before she even spoke. You were kind, she said, but no, I didn't. She turned and walked out. I sat there staring at my hands. The cafe was busy, people laughing, talking, living their lives. I'd never felt more invisible, more alone. I sat there for 2 hours, until the sun went down, until the waiter started giving me looks. Then I finally got up and left. I didn't rage, I didn't call her names, I didn't plot revenge. I just went back to my apartment and sat on the couch in the dark. I picked up my phone and scrolled through photos of Margaret. There were hundreds. Margaret at our wedding, young and radiant. Margaret in our backyard, gardening. Margaret at Christmas, laughing at some joke I'd made. Margaret in the hospital 2 days before she died, still smiling at me, still holding my hand. I missed her so much it physically hurt. That night I realized something painful and true and unavoidable. I wasn't looking for love when I found Reyna. I was running from grief, from loneliness, from the unbearable weight of an empty house and an empty life. And Reyna saw that. She saw a man so desperate to feel needed, so starved for connection, that he'd believe anything. A man so lonely he'd pay any price just to hear someone say, "I love you." I thought about the $140,000 I'd spent, Margaret's life insurance, the money we'd saved together over 40 years of marriage, gone. I thought about the house I'd never live in, the family that never wanted me, the nephew who called me Lolo until it was no longer useful. I thought about how stupid I'd been, how blind, how desperate, and I wondered if I'd ever trust anyone again. Probably not. I opened my laptop, searched for flights, Vancouver, one way, leaving in 3 days. I booked it without thinking. I didn't tell Dennis, didn't tell Reyna, didn't even tell my kids. I just packed my things and waited. On my last night in Manila, I sat on the balcony and looked out at the city, the lights, the noise, the life happening everywhere around me. I'd come here looking for something, a second chance, a new beginning, a reason to keep living. Instead, I'd lost everything. And maybe I thought that was my own fault. Maybe I deserved it for being so foolish, for believing something that was obviously too good to be true. The flight left at midnight. I took a taxi to the airport alone, checked in alone, boarded alone. And as the plane took off, I looked down at Manila disappearing beneath the clouds. Goodbye, I thought. Goodbye to all of it. Vancouver was exactly as I'd left it. Gray, cold, quiet. I took a taxi from the airport to a hotel downtown. I couldn't go back to the house yet, the house I'd shared with Margaret. I wasn't ready for that, so I stayed in a hotel room for 3 days, ordered room service, watched TV without really watching it, stared at the walls. On the fourth day, I forced myself to drive past the old house, just to see it. There was a new family living there now. I could see them through the window. A young couple, 2 kids, a dog in the yard. They looked happy. I sat in my car across the street for 20 minutes just watching. Then I drove away. A week later, I joined a grief support group. I found it online. Thursdays at 7 p.m. in the basement of a community center. I almost didn't go. What would I even say? But I went. There were 8 of us, all older, all alone in one way or another. The facilitator asked if anyone wanted to share. I raised my hand. I told them about Margaret, how she died suddenly from a stroke, how I hadn't known what to do with myself after, how the house felt empty, how I felt invisible. Then I told them about Reyna, the whole story, the money, the house, the betrayal. When I finished, there was silence. Then an older woman named Diane spoke. "You didn't lose yourself because of her," she said. "You lost yourself before you even met her." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You were grieving," she said. "And grief makes us do desperate things. You wanted to stop hurting. She offered you that. But healing doesn't come from another person. It comes from you." Her words hit me hard. She was right. I wasn't ready. I wasn't healed. And Reyna saw that vulnerability and used it. Over the next few weeks, I kept going to the group, kept talking, kept trying. One night after a session, I went home and opened my laptop. I typed out a message I knew I'd never send. "Dear Reyna, I hope the house makes you happy. I hope it was worth it. I hope you sleep well at night knowing what you did. Because I'll never be the same. I'll never trust the same way. I'll never love the same way. You took more than my money. You took my hope. And I don't know if I'll ever get it back." I stared at the words for a long time. Then I deleted them, closed the laptop, stood up. I walked to the window. It was snowing, soft and silent. The street below was empty. I thought about everything I'd lost, everything I'd given, everything I'd believed. And for the first time in months, I didn't cry. I didn't feel rage. I just stood there. breathing, watching the snow fall, knowing that tomorrow I'd wake up, and the day after that, and the day after that, and maybe eventually I'd be okay again. Not today, not yet, but someday, maybe.